Please turn your attention now to the screens as we share a pre-recorded interview with Dina Powell McCormick, former U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor, and the Policy Circles board member Laura Cox Kaplan.
Dina, thank you so much for being here for our 2023 The Policy Circle Summit. We are really, really happy to have you.
Thank you, Laura. I'm so delighted. I really apologize I can't be in person. I'm so disappointed not to be with you all, but excited to have this conversation and be part of the agenda.
Well, we are too. And as you know, this year's theme centers around unleashing our potential and particularly our economic potential. It's really the perfect topic to talk to you about because of your tremendous background in really working to help support underserved communities, underserved groups, including women, with getting access to capital and all those sorts of things. So I'd love to actually start the conversation there with you about why this kind of work is something that you've been doing for really the better part of, I would say, the last couple of decades.
Well, it's so interesting how important this issue is, and I think Policy Circle, really has focused on it as well from an advocacy perspective and women finding their voices, not just in industry or finance, but frankly in really in important government issues as well. And I just want to, really commend Kathy Hubbard and Sylvie and the amazing team, Stacy at Policy Circle. It's just so impressive to see all that has been built just over the years since when I remember they came and first told me about it. And I love the concept, and it's never been, more needed. Um, I also think that, we look around the world today and it's just crisis after crisis. And I really believe in some ways the lack of more female voices, on the policy stage, um, in the finance stage, in the private sector. It's just more needed than ever. And I think that's how we thought about it in 2007 when we launched 10,000 Women at Goldman Sachs. We had really seen through a lot of economic data and research that the power of female entrepreneurs and the power to unleash job creation, revenue growth, community building, and investment in the future of huge swaths of communities around the world, and particularly underserved communities, just was frankly one of the best investments that Goldman could find. And back then, not a lot of people were honestly talking about the economic empowerment of women.
Mm.
They were really understandably talking about women's rights as human rights, as issues around justice. And while that's so important, I think the thing that has moved the ball forward the most is really realizing the economic potential of women. And so now, over all these years, we've actually worked with nearly 100,000 female entrepreneurs. We've deployed over $1.2 billion of capital. And, it's just remarkable to see 80% increase in revenue, 60% new jobs being created, and 90% of women's income, new income generated, is always invested back into community. And so, we're just, seeing this grow, and many other companies have now joined in, on supporting this. I also think that when we talk about what's happening right now, for example, in the Middle East, and it's just so devastating,
Right.
and it's hard to not, raise it, the brutality and barbarism of the terrorist attack of Hamas, what we're witnessing when there was this huge moment of opportunity. Um, I really believe that Israel and Saudi, I know, were very close to normalizing. And a big piece of what that was going to mean for the region was the continuation of reform for women. And while each of these countries, have a long way to go, they certainly take steps back. I definitely had witnessed a growth in the number of women at senior positions in business in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates, in Bahrain. I mean, as you know, and I know that, Kathy Hubbard and the work that she did with Bridges of understanding so many years ago, I think none of us could have imagined that we'd be here today with the number of women in the workforce in the region. And I think that, we shouldn't give up on that hope right now, because I think the best revenge and the best hope for any kind of stability for the future of the region would be the continuation of the Abraham Accords, and certainly Saudi and Israel normalizing.
Yeah. So, Dina, you have access to this incredible group of women who are hearing you this morning, and you know many of these women, many of whom you've mentioned um, in our conversation this morning. But what advice would you give them? These are women who wake up every single day ready to tackle big challenges, either through the policy circle or through their independent efforts. But what advice would you have? Because I know that so many of the women in this audience share your concern, my concern about what's happening around the world. What can we do? What's your advice for each of us in terms of our level of engagement and what we can do to really move the needle at this point?
Well, there are a number of things, but I have to say that it's never been more important for all of us to feel connected together and working towards something, that all of us supporting each other, moving on initiatives together. I think it's why Policy Circle is so important, frankly. I just think that both physical and remaining in touch, all year, and then frankly, some of the regional meetings that I've been part of are just, critical. And it's never been more important for women to feel like they have really a responsibility to support each other, an opportunity to support each other, and doing that in ways big and small. This morning, I had breakfast with actually Laura, a mutual friend of you and I's, and she's an absolute rock star, and she just left a very senior role at an impressive company, and here she is, one of, I think, the most dynamic women in business. And, she was feeling a little bit unsure, like, what am I going to do now? And meanwhile, there are already so many people that want to talk to her. But even just my reminding myself, I'm going to really be that voice of encouragement. I think of her as someone who doesn't need any encouragement. And I really just went through, like, it's really remarkable all that you've built. And here is why you should be thinking this high, not low. You should be a CEO, and all the experience you've had from an operational perspective from all these years in such an important industry. And it amazes me. And I suffer from it, when we all just feel that insecurity, especially when we're in between roles, when we are, trying to figure out how to really have impact in the world,
Mhm.
commercial impact, philanthropic impact, meaningful ways to make a difference. And I think that the network of women is critical. I think that the kind of really reaching out and not taking for granted that someone doesn't need that extra push and support. In the span of the last hour, I've connected her with two people who are so excited to talk to her. And she certainly didn't need my help. But, I think I underestimate, we all need help. We need each other's support. We need each other's help. Frankly, I think the podcast, she said, and I'm not just saying this because you're interviewing me. I mean, I listen to those stories and I'm inspired. And I actually, like a couple of people, I've went and researched what they did and supported their causes. So the network, the platforms that give voice to incredible women, and finally the being pretty like honest about some of the challenges that remain. So, because for all the steps forward we feel we're taking, we're sometimes taking steps backward. And one of the things that I just always, talk about is the importance of sharing not just our successes with each other, but our failures, and recognizing. Certainly, I have had many, and for me, those are the moments I've grown. Like those are the moments. I mean, those horrifying moments of just knowing you messed up, or
Mhm.
didn't succeed in something, or you bombed in a meeting, and just sharing that honestly with each other, because we don't do enough of that as women. And I'll give you a funny example. We were doing a client pitch at Goldman, and there was this incredible woman who worked for me who was so prepared, knocked it out of the park, went in, crushed it. And the two senior guys, it was like they had barely read the deck. I was kind of horrified. I mean, we ended up winning the client. However, we walk out and they're high-fiving each other, the guys, meanwhile, they'd like gotten a key name wrong, and they got the wrong headquarters for the company. She had just crushed it. She made one tiny, like nothing burger, mistake. And she was obsessing about it. she was like, you know what, I'm so sorry. There was and I said, what are you talking about? Those idiot men just went out and were high-fiving each other. They can do no wrong in each other's eyes. And meanwhile, you just crushed it. So let that piece go. Don't rehash that a million times in your mind. Let that go and move on, because you won the business, and that's what we should focus on. And I think sharing those kinds of stories with each other, really, I think helps a lot.
Please welcome to the stage Laura Cox Kaplan.
You hear me? Am I on? Hi. Is this working? It's not working. Okay. There we go. There we go. Okay. You guys, Dina was so sad that she couldn't be here in person, as she said on the video. But I wanted to underscore just a couple of themes that she talked about. She covered a lot of ground. She's had an amazing career. She's done incredible work, both in the US and around the world, focused on women's economic empowerment and also, minority businesses as well. But a couple of additional themes that she talked about that I think are really important to also underscore is our personal buying power, and how when we make decisions about what we put on our bodies and what we put in our mouths and who we're buying from, that those decisions can oftentimes have a bigger impact than we oftentimes think. We had some great pop-up folks here at the summit, including my cute friend Stephanie Lilly with her bag company, the Lilly Line. Hopefully you guys had a chance to meet her, but she started this company after taking a big career, after taking a break in her career for 18 years to raise her kids, then saw this need where she could employ women in El Salvador who would manufacture these bags, and she is selling them, which is a really exciting story. But I want to pivot from our conversation with Dina and talk to these great panelists that are joining me here. I'm going to start with Stacey Rhodes, who is an author. She's a financial literacy expert. She actually started the Center for Financial Literacy at Liberty University. She is an accountant, an auditor, in fact, by background, starting her career at E&Y. She has a tremendous resume, so be sure you catch all the bells and whistles, which are in the app. And Adam Millsap, who is an economist and an author. He's written a terrific book about Dayton, and I'm going to look at the title because I want to get it right. It's called Dayton, the Rise and Decline and Transition of an Industrial City. He has a focus on, he's a senior fellow at Stand Together Trust, and obviously has a focus on economic opportunity. So we're going to cover a lot of ground in this panel, but I want to start with this topic of financial literacy. And when we talk about financial literacy, what do we really mean, right? It's not just understanding that it's helpful to have a checking account and a job. It goes well beyond that. So let's break it down, Stacey, in terms of how you think about that, and also maybe describe the problem that we're seeing related to financial literacy in this country.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here today. So when we talk about financial literacy, it's easy to jump to practical steps or habits. And I think it's so powerful to have a conversation with the women in this room, especially because more than half of the wealth in America is managed by women. And we're seeing that trend continue just because of the baby boomers, and where wealth originally was is now transferring to spouses. And so talk about financial literacy, I can certainly give you the 5 habits that you do them successful, the rest of your life you'll be just fine. But I believe that we're still seeing financial issues and financial literacy issues in our culture because we're missing that our view of money is formed by the age of 9 years old. How we think about it, how we feel about it. And so our behavior is just a reflection of our belief system. Talking about the investments and where women are spending our money, it really is generated out of our belief system and what we value. And so I believe the financial literacy conversation needs to take a step back, and instead of jumping to what are the practical things I need to do financially successful, it really gets down to our why. And Dr. Shapiro could not have teed up this conversation better than talking about the intention, which impacts our attention, which then impacts our attitude. And so I would say that the value system and the belief system and the why behind it is one of the most powerful conversations we can have. And the earlier we have it, the better.
I love that you just said that. I think that's a beautiful way to think about that and really underscoring our core values. But I'd love for you to get even more practical, right? You can start with the why and what your values are, but let's talk practically about how do you begin to present these concepts to potentially kids who are under the age of 9. And to be clear, it's not just about kids, but it is really helpful to start at that age, and that way you establish those habits, right?
Absolutely. So collaborating with university students has been eye-opening when we start talking about the value system. And so it really gets down to, what was your first money memory? We've had those conversations with elementary school, middle school, and usually the first money memory is around either the tooth fairy or stealing some candy or I've heard a series of stories. And so then it's, well, how does that make you feel? What do you think about money? Why do you feel that you need to hoard things or you don't feel as generous? And it's so revealing that even at a young age, children can articulate, well, my parents didn't have money, or the number one cause for divorce is money. So my parents were arguing about money, or I know mom's doing this, but we can't tell dad about that. And so it starts with asking the questions of what was your experience, and then drilling down even practically, well, what do you think if I give you $5, what are you gonna do with that $5? Okay, well, what do you think about if we were to set some money aside? Let's think long term. So the practicality is having the conversation, but then start instilling some of these financial habits. And the habits are really, really simple: spending less than you earn, avoid the use of debt, give generously, set long-term goals, and plan for financial margin. And can go through those even more extensively. But ultimately, you start instilling that mindset and having those principles and boiling it down to just a very practical level. It's pretty powerful what it can do.
Yeah, and it obviously, I'm going to pivot here to Adam, because without those great habits, right? I mean, bad things can happen even when you do have good habits, but they are exacerbated exponentially, right? When you don't have that level of discipline and when you've not been taught how to do that. So let's pivot to you and talk about sort of the crisis that's occurring, where we have just an alarming number of Americans who are financially vulnerable. There was an alarming number before the pandemic. It's an even higher number now post the pandemic. So maybe give us a sort of a snapshot of what we're looking at and sort of the depth of this crisis, frankly.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks to the Policy Circle for hosting this summit. So yeah, you're seeing, and I think the survey you're referring to, they talked about this increase in the number of people who are financially vulnerable. One of the things that I took away from it, and this goes back to something that Brad Wilcox talked about yesterday on his panel, was that people with full-time jobs that are engaged in the labor force are much less likely to be financially vulnerable. So I think the first path to financial security, right, is emphasizing the importance of employment and work, and creating a path to the market economy for folks who aren't already engaged in that. We talk about, the prime age male labor force participation rate, I think came up, 15% of males between the ages of 25 and 54 aren't working. What are they doing? A lot of it shows that they spend their time watching TV, engaged in social media, playing video games, right? So I think there's a crisis there in some communities of people just not engaging in the labor force. And so I think to the extent that we can change policies and foster like community organizations that can create a path to the market economy, I think that's a really great first step. Some of those things, again, people alluded to about like the benefits cliffs, right? There's a lot of social programs out there that have these sharp drops in support when you start earning more money, just incentivizes people to stay on the government program rather than taking that promotion or taking that better job. And so I think there's a lot of work there we can do to remove those out of the tax code to really incentivize work.
Let's talk a little bit about the work that Stand Together is doing with a number of organizations, and maybe with some greater specificity around some programs that you're engaged in that either you're super optimistic about or that are already working, and maybe ways that this audience can get involved with us.
Absolutely. So Stand Together, for those of you who don't know, it's a philanthropic community. We work through the 4 key institutions of society: business, government, communities, and education, with social entrepreneurs to break down barriers and to help people self-actualize, like achieve success. One of the organizations within the Stand Together philanthropic community is the Stand Together Foundation, and they make grants and provide resources to really like boots on the ground kind of organizations that are like doing the work in their communities. And a couple of them directly relate to this topic of empowering women and entrepreneurs, and also financial security. One is called Just, J-U-S-T, based out of Texas, and they invest in women entrepreneurs through capital and peer coaching. They made over 6,000 loans totaling over $14 million to help female entrepreneurs get their businesses off the ground. Another one is Rising Tide Capital, based out of New Jersey, and they provide business development services to help people grow and start and grow businesses. They work with like 1,000 people a year across 4 different states. And then a final one that we've recently started working with is called Lift Chicago, and they do one-on-one coaching with parents to help them set and then achieve financial goals, whether that's getting their debt under control, going back to school so they can start a different career, or finding a better job that provides more income to help them meet their goals. And they also make small cash grants to families to help them get on the path to achieving their goals. And one of the things that I think is important, that a theme that runs through all of these organizations, is that we don't want to create, these organizations, nonprofits that just try to control people, tell them what they need, right? We want to listen to them and then empower them and give them the resources they need and the help that they need to achieve the goals that they've set for themselves. And so we really emphasize, empowerment with the organizations that we work with, not top-down control, but it's like, you guys have a plan. People are best situated to know what they need in their own lives to achieve success. So let's listen and then provide them with the resources rather than expecting that we know what they need and trying to use that kind of top-down mentality.
Yeah, I love that you said that. That's great, and it's very empowering. There's an interesting data point in that next year will mark the 50th anniversary of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and that, of course, prevented discrimination based on gender as it relates to getting credit. So notwithstanding that 50 years of hopeful progress, right? And Dina's work, the work that Stand Together has done, the work that Dr. Rhodes has done, we still see challenges where women, small business owners, minority business owners still have trouble getting credit. Can we talk a little bit about what are some of the other obstacles? What's the problem? What's still not happening? What's standing in the way?
Absolutely. I think, again, it goes back to looking at where we came from. We have come so far, but there's still an education system around that this generation, the next generations are more diverse ethnically. And so what opportunities have they been given even to understand, to set themselves up in a position to be able to take advantage of some of the opportunities in the U.S.? And so while there's education opportunities as they've gotten older, and we're seeing that they're almost too late to the game, so to speak, if we can call it that, too late to the game. And so we really, I think some of it is an education barrier. It's an opportunity. There have been opportunity barriers. And so then it becomes, well, how do we fix that? And it goes back to the education system. The panel that we had before about involvement with parents in the education system, it does take a family unit, an ecosystem, to really get in and say, well, wait a minute, what are my kids learning? What are they exposed to? And it starts in the home, but then also encouraging the education system to provide this financial literacy education as well. And then from there, really start building on that momentum. So I wish I could say that if we did these 5 things, then we would eliminate the barriers immediately. But really, we are a generation away from change if we were to start some of that financial literacy right now, because it needs to start at such a young age to develop their value system. And so I think that some of the barriers are inevitable just because they've already set themselves back. And so what we can do is continue to offer that education, offer resources. I know Adam and I were talking about community resources and making sure that they're banding together these communities to tell people you don't just have to go to the government. You can actually come to these other places to get the education or to get the support and keep fighting for those opportunities.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy. Adam, let me turn to you and let's pivot and talk a bit more in depth about your book. You wrote a book about both the rise and decline in the city of Dayton. We're talking about communities and community involvement and this community cohesion. Maybe describe for us sort of what happened and what those challenges are, and how do we sort of get back what was lost?
I'm going to be much better at describing the problem than offering solutions. So I'll describe the problem first.
That is unfortunate.
And maybe other smart people in the room will have solutions. But Dayton, I think, is kind of the classic example of the Midwestern Rust Belt city, very oriented around manufacturing. Manufacturing started declining in the 50s and 60s and 70s. There was international competition, but also just more automation that just required less workers. But that was good for consumers, right? Because it lowered prices. But at the same time, workers had a transition, and in some cities, those transitions were not as smooth as they were in others. And I think one of the things you see in these for anybody who's maybe from the Midwest or from a town like this, you see that there's a decline also in like civic associations and community organizations, especially a lot of times when a big employer leaves. So in Dayton, one of the big employers was NCR, National Cash Register Company, which now they have nothing to do with cash registers for anybody who still knows what they do, but that's how they got started. And James Patterson, the guy who started the company, was very into like providing resources for the community. So, putting his name on parks, providing these kind of like public goods that he thought his workers needed to be productive. And so when you lose a big employer like that, you also lose a lot of those kind of services and everything. And I think that's been a problem in some of these cities that they never really gotten back. So I think that's kind of the problem as far as what to do about it. I know less. I don't really have a ton of good suggestions, but this is a problem that I think that researchers have been grappling with for at least, going back to Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, about the decline of like civil society and stuff like that. So this is a problem that people have been thinking about for a long time. And maybe you guys have seen some success in your own communities about ways to rebuild that kind of social fabric. So I would encourage anyone out there who has ideas to definitely execute on those, because the institution of communities is very important. And without it, there becomes this over-reliance on what can the government do for us, right? Rather than thinking about how can our friends and our neighbors and our churches help us out, our religious organizations help us. And I think it's really important to create those alternatives so that people don't get trapped in maybe like the government program when they just need a quick leg up, but instead can go to other sources of support and assistance.
Yeah, thank you for that. Stacy, let me turn back to you, and let's talk a little bit about any collaborative successes that you've seen in working with other organizations and looking for ways to maybe right-size an approach to financial literacy and really incorporate that into what they're doing, even if they are actually involved maybe in another space. There's a lot of organizations that are represented here. A lot of folks are involved with very diverse organizations. So how can you sort of incorporate this approach and maybe some specific suggestions for sort of ways to start that?
I love that question. And the collaboration piece is what I'm so impressed with the policy circle. This is my first time being involved, and I just think it's a powerful space to create nexus and create these opportunities. I think the first thing is that we all have to own it. How can you lead somewhere? How can you lead someone somewhere you've never been yourself? And so rather than jumping to fixing other problems, there's a level of personal awareness and ownership of the personal financial literacy piece that I encourage all the women, all the people, all the clients in my life. And that starts with getting involved with the education piece. And Smart Women, Smart Money magazine, I get to write for them, and they have an incredible platform and space for women and how to manage their money. Having a coach or advisor themselves. And so when I see the biggest collaborations, I see people who are passionate, who get it, who are living it out, who are not perfect by any means, but are offering vulnerability in, hey, let me just come alongside. I don't have all the answers, but I'm walking in this journey. I just want to be involved. So biggest collaborations is their passion behind it. And then that person is taking extreme ownership in taking it to the education system or taking it to the university or being involved with banks. We have a lot of opportunities with banks where they have financial literacy money to spend in the community. Unfortunately, there's all of these banks doing that, and they just don't even realize what spaces still need to be served. And so the more we have an abundant mentality and we say, I have this, you have this, you have this, what are your skill sets, resources, we're all passionate, let's now go fix this problem. And so I think it's that mindset shift, the personal journey, the willingness to be vulnerable, and then also bringing your resources together and it not being a competition space, but again, creating those networking opportunities to share resources.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. You know, I talk to a lot of female entrepreneurs on my podcast, and, you know, they talk about this notion of access to capital. It's sort of less about financial literacy and more about just having access, and also sometimes how there can be maybe a lack of understanding on the part of the person that they're going to for credit or money or, you know, as an investor, a lack of understanding about their business, because in some respects they're running businesses that are very female, or they're creating female-oriented products, right? Handbags, purses, I mean, all sorts of things, right? That sometimes they go to men and say, hey, I need a loan for this business. And they're like, why would anybody want that? And she knows that who her target customer is. But maybe talk a little bit about some of those types of obstacles that in some communities still exist.
Absolutely. It's interesting you say that, because there has been, in business, you naturally gravitate to people that you connect with or that have been in this space longer. And so you do create kind of this tribalism, if we can use that word, and I know that was brought up last night, this tribalism, and people can be shut down in that space and be shut down because they're just not part of that. And so to your point, the access to capital, the connections, the voice being heard are absolutely obstacles that we see. And so I think that especially for women, the more that we have exposure, and I do feel a little bit of having the credentials or having the right to speak, that can still be very present in our culture. What is incredible is that the trail has been blazed before, and so it becomes one of those intentionalities that we need to bring to say, I'm going to do my research on who I'm talking to, and then not just speak it, but maybe experience it and evidence it. And so I'm seeing women entrepreneurs, and I believe you could probably speak to this and how they are getting a yes, but really trying to bring that individual into their world. I do think it's a lot harder for certain ladies than other individuals, but I think the more you are passionate and you can creatively invite people in and show them proof of concept, then there's more success there. But those barriers exist, and unfortunately I don't have all the solutions either.
Yeah, Adam, any perspective on the topic?
The access to capital? Yeah, so I'm an economist, and I think America has a huge problem with regulations. I would feel like a dereliction of duty if I didn't criticize some of the regulations that I think cause some of these issues. So one of them, in the last 20 years, has been like a 50% decline in the number of banks, FDIC-insured banks. A lot of people point to Dodd-Frank as being a part of this, over-regulating the financial sector, especially for small community banks, which have traditionally been an important source of financing for small businesses, especially businesses outside of like areas where there's a lot of venture capital or where they're not like in a high-tech industry or something like that, right? Banks are traditionally the people who loan money for restaurants and those kind of small businesses, right? It's one thing if you're going to start a new tech firm, you can probably find money if you have a good idea, but not a lot of venture capital out there for starting the local restaurant or the local, store or anything like that. So banks are an important part of that. And so I think we need to figure out what can we do to make it easier for banks to make loans to small businesses, what we have to do to increase the source of capital. I also think there's some problems like the accredited investor rule Right now, it's very difficult to support a business as an individual unless you have pretty high income or high assets. And I think if we change those rules a little bit, you're seeing more equity crowdfunding coming online now. There's different platforms and stuff where you can go donate you can go invest in small businesses. But again, that's really hard if you're not an accredited investor and don't have. So I think doing something about that, making it easier for the supply of capital increase, I think would help a lot. And so I think there's rules around the accredited investor stuff that would help increase the supply, and then also help small businesses find more financing. I also think housing is a problem. So in many places where the most economic opportunities are, housing is really expensive, and that's going to make it hard for lower and middle income folks to find shelter in places where there are opportunities. So I think we need to do something about land use regulations and zoning in this country to make some of the more high opportunity areas more accessible to folks of more modest means. And so that's an issue that I care about and write a lot about.
I mean, there's so many examples that you guys have given this audience for places where we can engage. We've covered a lot of ground on this panel, but I think you get a sense of both the depth of the problem and also the tremendous opportunities that exist for us to collaborate and actually work on all these different aspects. So hopefully it's given kind of a broad brush of challenges and opportunities where we can all continue to collaborate together, including with the organizations that are represented here. So please join me in thanking our tremendous panelists, Dina Powell McCormick, who was on the video, Adam Millsap, and Stacy Rhodes. Really, thank you all very, very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.